Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. And on this episode, I'm excited to be talking to Cece Harrison. And we're going to be talking about not her newest book, because I haven't had a chance to read that one yet, but one of her newer books, Death by G String. And this is a Coyote Canyon Ladies Ukulele Club mystery. But before we get too far in, Cece, go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I write suspense, and I write Old West historical fiction. I'm a former Four Corners resident. I lived on the Navajo Reservation as a volunteer, and after that was over, I moved to Cortez, where I wrote my first two books, both of them set on the reservation, and a lot of the characters in my book are based on people that I met on the res.
You've got kind of a variety of characters that we'll get into, so it'll be interesting to hear a little bit more about kind of where those inspirations came from. But first, tell us a little bit about the book so our listeners know what we're about to talk about.
This is a book that was almost not written and a title that was almost stolen from me. Basically, I never thought I would ever write a book that had a music theme. I have had no music training ever, not as a child, but I've always loved music, either classical or country or rock. But one day, many years later, I saw Zooey Deschanel on television playing the ukulele. I don't know if you remember her. She is an actress. And I stopped what I was doing and watched. I was fascinated because she looked so darn cute. Not long after that, I saw somebody's 90-year-old grandmother on television playing the ukulele. And again, something compelled me to stop and watch. And about 2 weeks after that, I read in my local community paper that Heidi Swedberg was coming to a local library to give ukulele lessons, and she was bringing ukuleles to use. And you may remember Heidi as George's girlfriend on Seinfeld. She now has a touring ukulele group called Heidi Swedberg and the Suki Jump Band. I signed up for the ukulele class at the library, and when I walked in the room, I saw, and I was surprised to see, that almost all the seats were filled. I had no idea that anybody was that interested in playing ukulele. Heidi walked in pulling a huge cart of ukuleles, and she walked around handing them out. She taught us a few chords, and by the end of the class, I could play a complete song. And I was so excited. And I have to tell you that at the end of the class, when Heidi came around collecting the ukuleles, I didn't want to give it back. But I did. And the next day, I went out and bought a soprano ukulele, a chord chart, and a book for beginners. I eventually joined the Phoenix Ukulele Club, and I learned one song by heart and made my solo coffee shop debut not long after that. And it was about that time I began telling people that I was born to be a rock star, but I write books instead.
I love that. Fun. And great job for your local library to bring in something really cool like that everybody was so excited for.
And not only that, right after that, my local library my ukulele group donated some ukuleles to my local library, and they would rent them out, just like they do books.
Oh, cool. That's a great idea. Having the inspiration of the music, how did that then blossom into this mystery story set in a little Colorado mountain town?
At the time, I was really involved in music, so I wasn't doing much writing, but eventually a book idea came to me, and I started writing, and it just, the whole plot just sort of came to me all together. And I did use a lot of the people, and I do this a lot. I use people that I know in my books. Sometimes they're happy about it, and sometimes they're not. But in this book, I based the characters on several of my ukulele musicians that I played with. And it just sort of developed from that. And as I said, the Death by G String title was almost taken from me. I was at a writer's conference before I had even started this book. I was still tossing the idea around in my book, in my mind. And I was sitting next to an author, and she asked me what I was working on, and I told her the title, and she immediately said, "Use that title. If you don't, I'm going to." So when I got home from the conference, I started writing the book.
Well, that's good motivation to get it down on paper so no one else can have it first. So let's dive into the mystery. So this is a murder mystery story, and its main group of characters is a ukulele club. And
It is.
everything kind of comes back to this small town and the connections that people have that they know about. Sometimes they don't know about, that they find out through the course of things. But you bring a lot of different aspects together into your story. So where was your, I guess, starting point for putting all of the pieces together? You said it kind of came to you, but I know even when you have like a great idea like that, there's still a lot of finessing when you're actually putting it down onto paper, and then, okay, maybe that didn't quite work so well. Let's tweak it a little bit here. So what was your process like for putting the whole story together?
Well, I do love to talk about process, and I do like to hear how other authors do it. I have found that every author writes their book a different way, and I actually allow my book idea to sort of brew in my head for quite a while before I put a word down on paper. And I have all the major plot points. I don't necessarily have every scene. I don't have every bit of dialogue or anything like that, but I have the major plot points in my head so that when I sit down to write, I start putting those plot points down on index cards. And then I shuffle them in the order that I would expect the book to go. And what that does for me, so many authors complain about writer's block. To my mind, there is no such thing as writer's block. It's lack of planning. So when I then actually start to work on the manuscript, I have to have the characters' names. They have to be real to me before I can start writing them and having them experience things. Once I have the names, I just follow my index cards. So I always know where I'm going, even though it's all in my head. I follow the index cards, so I always know where I'm going. I'm never stuck for what direction to go. I never always know how I'm going to get there, and that's the creative part of it. But once I get there, achieve that plot point and move on to the next. And I basically have a book complete by the end because I revise chapter by chapter as I go. And at the end, basically all I need to do then is just do a quick run through and check for typos and grammar and things like that.
So do you hit points, especially with mystery, because sometimes you have it planned and then you're like, that's too predictable, or, someone reads it and they're like, yeah, I figured out what was going on. Different things are like, oh, that clue didn't quite lead where I thought it was going to lead. Did you run into any of those kind of problems while you were doing your initial index card plot points? Or as you were actually putting it into chapter form, did you have any, hitches in your planning at that point?
No, I really didn't, and I really don't in my books because I always know who did it, so I can more easily plant my clues. But again, my books are not necessarily mystery format. It is suspense, so I have multiple points of view, and always I have some point of view from the bad guy. So readers kind of know what is going on already. They don't have to guess who it is necessarily.
And what led you to multiple points of view? Because that does kind of change the dynamic of how you write a mystery. You said some information is given automatically by using the multiple point of views. So in some levels, it gives you more freedom, but then it's harder to hold back certain information. So what led you toward that path and that style of keeping the suspense going rather than kind of a more strict one-person perspective where the reader only knows what the character knows as well?
Well, for one thing, those were the books that I always loved to read. I always loved to read the suspense. And for another thing, I remembered what Alfred Hitchcock said a long time ago, that it is more suspenseful if the audience knows the bomb is under the chair, but the person sitting on the chair doesn't know it.
That's a great point.
That's where the suspense comes in for the viewer in a movie or for the reader in a book.
Now, with your suspense, I think this is one of those things that some people kind of have a really natural knack for doing. And then others, they really plan it out. They have a system for introducing something and then how long before it's touched on again, or, kind of that teasing, that pull back and forth with different clues or different little elements. When you're looking at how to keep suspense going in your stories, how do you approach that? Is it analytical or is it more by feel with quotes around it as you're writing?
I guess I don't quite write that formulaic. I mean, I have learned since I've had books published that some authors have a real formula for that. Something happens on page 10 and then something happens on page 35. But I don't write that way. But basically, the way I keep suspense going is leaving a hook at the end of each chapter.
I like that approach. I'm similar in that, and like I'm trying to be better about planning and being a little bit more of an outliner or analyzing things ahead of time. But I tend to be not that type of writer, so it's a skill I have to learn. But
well,
I think that hook at the end is a really good guidepost as well.
So many authors are pantsers, and I just cannot conceive of that because all I can see at the end of that is a whole bunch of work that has to be redone, which is why I am a plotter, but not to the extent that I write 40-page character outlines, nothing like that. But I have all my plot points in my head and then on index cards.
Well, and that leads me to the next question that I wanted to ask you about. Your main character, Viva Winter, which is a fun name, by the way. I enjoyed her name. Her development, because even though you do have multiple perspectives, she kind of holds everything together and she navigates the overall mystery and kind of spearheads some of the different paths toward figuring things out. So when you were thinking about who to make kind of that glue between all the other characters, what led you toward Viva as that person? And then how did you approach developing her character?
I want to thank you for recognizing that in my book. I try to have my female characters in all of my books sort of the same way in that they are strong, independent women. Don't scream and run away at the first sign of trouble. They do what they need to do to make things right. And it's not that they don't like men. They love men. And I usually put a love interest in my books, but she doesn't depend entirely on a man to do the hard work. She'll figure things out and try to do it on her own. So I guess that just kind of came natural for me to have Viva Winter do that. Well, maybe because that's what I do myself.
I was going to say, sometimes that's what we know, and there's always parts of our lives that bleed into our fiction. But I was going to ask, I think that is something with like the idea of the strong female lead, that sometimes that can lend to stereotypes or to kind of a template character where it's like, here's my starting point and maybe I'll give her a few different things. It feels like there was a period of time in publishing where it was like strong female lead. And like sometimes the writers like really hit it and it was really relatable, great character. And other times it kind of felt like a stock character of like, oh yeah, this character ticks all the expected boxes, but like they're kind of missing something to be really relatable and realistic and, just that character you can really connect with. That's very challenging, especially I think when you're looking at it as like, this is a trend, like I need a strong female lead for someone to pay attention to my book. So when I see a female lead in a book, that's always kind of the first thing that comes to mind is like, okay, which kind of female lead is this going to be? Am I going to relate, or are they going to feel kind of like same old character over and over again? So you've said that you don't do the 20-page character profiles. But what do you do as you're developing your character through the course of writing the book? Like, what's your approach for making sure that it is a nuanced, interesting, relatable character?
Well, I'm hoping all of my female characters did not come across as being the same. But basically, my mantra when I start writing my character is that the story is about ordinary women facing extraordinary circumstances because of someone else's mistake, but sometimes their own. So I try to make my characters, they are not, what do they call them now? They don't walk around with automatic weapons or anything like that. They are ordinary, everyday people like you and I. And as we know, if we read true crime, ordinary, extraordinary things happen to ordinary women. And that's what I try to show in my books. And there is one other thing, and this may sound kind of naive, and I guess I was naive back then, but years and years and years ago when I was young, of course, I was a huge reader. And the things I read in books tended to sort of inform my thinking or behavior. And I was young. And so when I started writing, I guess I kind of kept that in mind too. I was hoping that any young woman reading, of course, times have changed a lot now from when I was young, but I always wanted to think that young women reading my books would sort of want to be inspired by my characters. Therefore, I have my characters. Sometimes they do bad things and make mistakes, but it all comes out. They make it all right in the end.
And I think that's a great lesson. Especially, I work with teenagers and I see the choices that they make. And again, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. We have to, as the adults, try to help them navigate that. But I think you kind of take on that role as the writer as well, where it's not always necessarily like a specific intention of like, I'm going to use this character to teach a lesson to my readers. But like as you're developing those characters, it's in the back of your mind, right? Like how would the reader interpret this? What are they going to get out of it? Are they going to be able to relate to this character who, has made some mistakes and maybe that wasn't the greatest choice, but how do they handle it? Are they going to, pass the buck and not take responsibility and continue going down a certain route? Or are they going to step in and be like, okay, I got to make a change or I got to do this? And I think a lot of that comes across as the experience for the reader of seeing people who are different from us and how they handle situations. And it makes you think, like, what would I do in that situation if I have, these crazy things happening around me, but I still have to make choices that might impact other people? And that was something that your character Viva had to make decisions about. And sometimes they were hard of like, do I turn this over? Do I step in? Do I, say something at this point or not? And as a real person, like, we don't always know the answer. We don't know what is the best thing to do. It's complicated.
Well, my intention is never to set out, when I start writing a book, my intention is never to send a message. Although what we just talked about, that is in the back of my mind when I have my character make decisions. But there is no message. I couldn't say that my message is, always doing right or don't do this or don't do that. To me, a message in fiction, like that ruins the story for me to read or to write.
Like I would feel, I think myself as a writer, like I would feel boxed in and like maybe I would lose something in the development of the overall story if my mindset was, well, no, I'm really trying to make this point, so I've got to stay focused on this point. It's like, well, there might have been like an interesting side path that would have really added depth to the story, but if you ignore that, then we kind of lose that, not only from the story, but from whatever the character might have learned from taking that side path. So it's really interesting just thinking about planning, but still being open as you're writing to the development. And it sounds like you have ideas for your characters, but you let them grow over the course of the writing and the development of the story as well.
Well, that is what I try to do. And I often have readers ask me, or writers in a class will ask me if there is any of myself. Do I put any of myself in my books? And I have to say that, there's some of me in every book that I write. The character would be maybe, younger and slimmer and smarter, but part of me is in every book that I write.
Yeah, I think it's impossible not to do that because we're made up of experiences. And as we try to tell stories, our own experiences are going to shade and color what we're writing. I mean, I think that adds depth to a story. And it's funny because I love working with young writers, and it's a lot of fun to see where they're at and their skills develop. But one of the funny things of working with like teen writers is they still just have such limited experience. They don't know too much about adult life, and sometimes they know too much because they've been through some traumas. And it's interesting to see how that colors what they're saying and how they perceive things and how they write adults or situations that they've never been in, that they're not familiar yet. And they're doing their best, and I love to see them grow and develop and practice that. But it is interesting as the adult to see that and be like, oh, well, that's what they think this is going to be like. Like, Not quite,
Yeah,
but, you're on your way there. It's like, we can't help but put some of ourselves into everything we write. That's the nature of creative work. It comes from an internal place.
well, I have been fortunate, I guess, that I have lived a very interesting life. I have, I don't want to take up the whole program with what I've done, but like I say, I have lived on the Navajo reservation. After I left my corporate life, I retired young, went to the Navajo reservation on a volunteer mission. When I moved to Cortez, I didn't know anybody and nobody knew me, and I recommend that every woman do that at one time in their life. It is the feeling of freedom you will never have anywhere else. And I have been on an archaeological dig. I could go on, but I do draw from my own experiences. Of course, most of them came after a second divorce, and I was free.
Well, and like I said, our life experiences kind of open up at different times, and when we have the space to be creative, and sometimes we have other concerns and commitments that we've got to focus on instead. But I'm glad that you have been able to bring so much of your experiences into your stories to share with readers. I think it's a lot of fun to see different writers and how their backgrounds play a role in what they write. And some people really incorporate that, and others keep it a little bit more compartmentalized. It's fun to see the range of that. And we're getting to the point that I wanted to make sure to leave time, because you do have a new book that has come out, which I have not had the chance to read yet. But we want to make sure we mention that, so that if people are intrigued by Death by G-String and want to see what else you have going on, please tell us a little bit about your more recent book as well.
Well, my new book that came out in July is an Old West historical fiction called The Women of Banded Bend. And my female characters take over the entire plot. Straight-laced Tally Tisdale and her free-spirited 16-year-old sister Ivy arrive in Sutton Creek, Colorado in 1863 to take over their missing father's rugged homestead on secluded Banded Bend. Land agent Goodnight Pettyjohn warns them of unimaginable hardships, days of backbreaking work, deadly mountain storms, dangerous wild animals, and ruthless, trigger-happy outlaws. He doesn't mention that land grabbers also covet their father's claim and are willing to resort to violence to get what they want. But Carl Henry Tisdale made sure that both his daughters know how to shoot a gun, ride a horse, and drive a wagon. So strong-willed and adventurous Tally welcomes the challenge, but not so Ivy. And when bandit Birch Quinn returns to dig up stagecoach loot he's secretly buried on their father's claim, Ivy sees him and the gold as a way to escape the drudgery and boredom of homesteading. So again, I have my strong, independent woman with one younger girl, and remember this is 1863, who is feeling penned in and is not liking to do all that hard work of homesteading.
You have a good contrast to present to readers there, and I'm interested to see what you do with that, because I can definitely see not everybody is going to love the homesteading life and be like, this is not what I was cut out for, this is not my interest. And then to see this interesting opportunity with someone who may or may not be a good choice on who to align with.
As many 16-year-olds, they do make bad choices.
Very true. Tell me a little bit, because the book that I had the chance to read, Death by G-String, is contemporary, and this is historical fiction. Tell me a little bit about, in our last couple minutes, just that difference of switching between contemporary and historical and working with two different genres like that.
Well, what an interesting question, and I'm glad you asked, because my first Old West historical was a book called Sage Kane's House of Grace and Favor, and that book was channeled to me. The book was complete in my head before I sat down to write, and it felt like after I wrote that one that I must have lived one of my previous lives back in that time, because the book just poured out of me. And then when this one came around, it was almost the same thing. The book just kind of poured out of me like I had experienced those things.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I didn't start out to write historical fiction. I never dreamed that I ever would. I just was intrigued and wanted to write contemporary suspense. In order to write these historical fiction, I had to do a lot of research on the Old West. I mean, I hadn't moved to the West yet. So I did a lot of research, and I have quite a broad collection of historical books, fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to write historical fiction. I know with some of my books in the past where I've done, mythology, paranormal, things like that. Like just that takes a lot of time spent researching and looking up lore and all of that. But like the details of what the characters are doing is just normal modern life. I can't imagine having the time, at least right now in my life, to devote toward researching a historical time period well enough to get all of the details accurate. That sounds like just more than I can handle at this point. So I admire people who write historical fiction because it's really hard and really time consuming in that way to like really make sure you're accurate on top of developing really great characters and a great storyline as well.
I did try when I write a historical fiction, and by the way, the first one I wrote was a Colorado Book Award finalist. When I write historical fiction, I think really hard about what life was like then. And of course, I have a lot of research material about that, but I want my characters in historical fiction to be identifiable to women today. I mean, really, women had the same fears, they had the same dreams, they had the same ideas back then. They were just in a different environment, facing different challenges.
That's so true. That's the universality of really good fiction, is that it can stay relevant across time and connect with us because we are still facing similar challenges, whether that's physical things or on the mental or emotional level. We're still humans no matter the time period, and bringing those elements into play can really help span those generations or last even longer, like some of our classic literature. It's always interesting to see what stories and what characters really stand the test of time because they are so relatable and forge those connections.
Humans are the same pretty much over time, except for, as I say, they face different challenges, but women's feelings are the same.
Well, and that leads me to my last question to start wrapping up. Are you working on anything currently, and is there something we should keep an eye out for after people check out your other books?
I am working on a shoreline mystery series. This is contemporary, and it is not set in the West. It's the only book that I've written or am thinking to write that is not set in the West. It is set on the Great Lakes in Michigan. I don't have them complete. They're partials right now, but book one is called Bad Deeds, and the other is called Hot Mess. And basically, it's about a woman who, again, has been on her own. Times got hard for her. She went back to a small town in Michigan to be with a recalcitrant father, and her past comes back to cause problems for her in her new living situation.
Well, that sounds like an intriguing one as well.
Well, I'm from Michigan, and the Great Lakes played a huge role in my life growing up, and that's what kind of led me to that book idea.
I like that. Well, as we finish up, Cece, tell people where they can find you and your books online, and any place particular you want to shout out for getting your books or making a connection if they'd like to send you a message.
My books are available on Amazon and in every bookstore. That's all I can think to say, DelSheree.
Okay, that's totally fine. Are you a social media person or not so much?
I do follow Facebook now and then. I really don't have time for Instagram and all that, although I am always telling myself I'm going to start doing it. But basically, my Facebook is CC Harrison-Arizona Author.
Okay.
And my Facebook will come up, and also my website.
Well, we'll put a link to your website in the show notes to make it easy for people to connect with you. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today and for sharing your book as well.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, DelSheree. I'm very happy to do this.